In the early hours of the 15th of August 2017, emergency services received a 999 call reporting that a car was on fire. When firemen arrived at the scene, they would discover the body of a young woman who had been burned alive. A murder investigation promptly began, and by that very evening, police had arrested their suspects, 2 men who were already convicted killers. Hello lovelies, I'm TrueCrimeCaitlyn and welcome to my channel and another true crime case. Thank you so much for being here with me. If you're interested in true crime, please make sure to subscribe because that's what this channel is all about. You can also click the little bell button so that you'll be notified every time I upload a brand new true crime case. Before continuing to watch, please make sure to check the description box below for my disclaimer and for any content warnings. Also, before we jump into today's video, I do want to apologise in advance if I mispronounce any names within today's video. I did try to correctly pronunciate all of them, but again, if I get them wrong, I apologise in advance and I don't mean any disrespect by it. Today we're going to be talking about a case which involves 2 men where evil runs through their veins. Habitual offenders who both separately committed murder, then once released from prison and given a second chance at freedom, would go on to repeat their heinous actions. I'm TrueCrimeCaitlyn and this is the murder of Quyen Ngoc Nguyen. Quyen was born in Vietnam on the 1st of September 1988 into a very happy, loving family. By all accounts, she had a very regular early life. Everyone who met Quyen loved her because she was so kind and she just had the warmest heart. Her sister, Quyen, would say that Quyen was a bit gullible. She was a little bit naive. If our friends were having a life or were having a joke on with her about something like friends do, Quyen would believe them. She'd believe every word that they said. She took everything really seriously. Quyen would become a mother of 2. She had a son and a daughter who she absolutely doted on. She was a brilliant mother to her children. She was devoted, she was loving, she was amazing. She was a really great mum. I couldn't pinpoint exactly when she had her children, but she would eventually become a single mother of 2. Quyen wanted more than what she believed Vietnam would be able to offer her. So she made the decision, along with her sister, to up and move to the UK in 2010. She thought that this move was going to be wonderful, that the UK would present them with more opportunities, that it was a better way of life for her and her family, and that it would be a safe place for them to live. In preparation for this move, Quyen actually taught herself how to speak English. She was so smart. Quyen was so excited to move to the UK, and something that she'd wished for, something that she dreamed about, something that she could not wait to do was to play in the snow with her children. How cute is that? When snowfall arrived, she was so happy, and her and her kids got straight outside, got stuck into it, and they had the best time experiencing this together. Quyen attended university in London where she studied business and then would go on to graduate. Quyen and Quyen eventually moved right up north, living in Killingworth in North Tyneside, and they lived here together in the same house with both of their families. So Quyen and her children, then Quyen, her husband and their children. Together, the sisters ran a very busy nail shop, which they both worked very long hours in, and alongside this, Quyen was also a landlord. She rented out properties in low-income areas at a cheaper rate so that she could help people and families who were living in poverty and people who weren't able to rent a house either through other landlords or through the council. Quyen wasn't one of these shitty landlords though. She wasn't one of them where you've got mould and they don't care, or your boiler's broken and you've got to nag at them to fix it. She wanted her tenants to be happy and to be comfortable, so she always kept on top of repairs and maintenance and all of that stuff. And this is how she ended up meeting Stephen Unwin. Stephen ran his own sort of maintenance business where he would do handiwork and odd jobs for landlords. Unbeknownst to Quyen and probably a lot of Stephen's clients, he was a career criminal who had already served a life sentence for murder. From a very young age, Stephen began a pattern of crime and getting into trouble with the police. In March 1992, when he would have only been about 14 or 15-year-old, he was convicted of theft of a motor vehicle along with arson after he had set a HGV on fire. Later in the year, he broke into the house of a 72-year-old man and completely ransacked it. He stole this man's benefit book, which this man would have used to go and cash in his benefit payments. So Stephen had stolen this. He then set 5 fires all around the house and then fled, leaving this 72-year-old man to be engulfed by the flames. Thankfully, a neighbour had spotted that this man's house was on fire and contacted emergency services, who were able to get him out of the house in time. He had been badly affected by smoke and gas inhalation, but he was alive. Over the years, Stephen's crimes would escalate and he would become more and more dangerous with each crime that he was committing. He started off with theft, but nothing that would directly harm someone else. He then began to experiment with arson, and then he moved up. He escalated again when he burgled that man's house. He broke into it, he burgled it, and then he set the fires in order to try and cover his tracks. That would have directly harmed that man had emergency services not gotten there and managed to extract him from the house in time. So with every single crime that he's committing, even between the ones that I've just told you about, he's getting more and more dangerous. But on Christmas Day in 1998, Stephen would yet again escalate, take his crime one step further, and he committed his first murder. In the early hours of the morning, 21-year-old Stephen had broken into the bungalow of a man named John Greenwell. John was a 73-year-old retired pharmacist who was incredibly ill. He was really poorly with terminal cancer. Stephen had broken into his bungalow, made his way through to John's bedroom, where John was laid asleep in bed, and began to bludgeon him with a heavy camera. He continuously whacked John with this camera over and over before ultimately stabbing him in the chest and killing him. Stephen then used a wheelie bin to transport a TV that he had stolen from John back to his home where he lived with his mum, and they literally only lived along the street. It wasn't even a 10-minute walk away. Stephen then made his way back to John's bungalow, where he stole a video recorder, set 3 fires throughout, and fled. By now, setting fires to try and cover his tracks and incinerate evidence has almost become a signature for Stephen now. As he's walking back along home, 2 police officers who were on patrol, who likely knew and recognised Stephen, noticed him walking carrying this video recorder, so they kind of stop him and question him about it. He convinces them that this is his and they accept it. They tell him Merry Christmas and let him get on his way. Mere moments later, these 2 officers noticed thick black smoke filling the sky in the distance. They quickly called or radioed for the fire service, who promptly arrived at John's bungalow, and it was here inside the bungalow that they found the charred remains of 73-year-old John Greenwell still lay in his bed. Stephen was quickly arrested, and at Newcastle Crown Court he pled guilty to murder. He would go on to receive a life imprisonment sentence with a minimum of 12 years to serve. While serving at HMP Swaleside on the Isle of Shippey, Stephen's cellmate was another convicted killer, another man who was serving a life sentence for committing murder. This man was William McFall, and the 2 became very close friends. They would even call each other brothers. William John McFall is an Irishman originating from Green Island, which is northeast of Belfast. An old neighbour of his would later talk about him and describe him as, quote, troubled and always in trouble. He was someone to be avoided and incredibly aware of. From being a teenager, William showed many traits that we see in many other evil psychopathic killers, one of these being animal abuse. A friend of William's was breeding mice for a local pet shop when the pair of them got into an argument and then fell out, but instead of sorting it out together like civilized people, William decided to take his anger out on the defenseless mice. Using scissors, William beheaded 40 mice and then lined the headless bodies up on his friend's doorstep. How sick and twisted and disturbing is that? He has no regard for life at all. He would tally up several convictions for things including aggravated robbery, possessing firearms and defensive weapons, and arson. As far as I could tell, he got in no trouble at all for what he'd done to them mice. On the 5th of May 1996, William arrived at the home of 86-year-old Martha Gilmore with intentions to rob the house. For some reason, he believed that Martha had a fortune stashed under her bed. So when he arrived, he clicked the doorbell to see if anyone was going to answer, to see if anyone was home. If no one was home, this robbery, this burglary would be so much easier. He stood and he waited for a few minutes, and when no one came to the door, he broke inside. However, when he got inside the house, he realised the house was not empty. Martha had mobility issues and she didn't get anywhere fast and relied on a walking stick to help her move around. She was making her way to the door to answer it after William had rang the doorbell when he had broken in, and when he seen Martha, he panicked because he knew that Martha knew who he was, she would recognise him, she would be able to name him to police, and he wasn't going to let that happen. He struck Martha with so much force that he knocked her to the floor. Then, using a hammer that he had brought, he whacked her over the head with it at least 3 times, killing her. He then dragged her body through the home so that he could get back out and make his escape. Martha's body would be found the following day. She was found in a pool of her own blood. Police were quite quickly able to identify William as her killer, as he had left a full palm print on the inside of our door. So they extracted this, tracked it down to William, and he was quite quickly arrested. He pled guilty to Martha's murder at Belfast Crown Court and smirked as he was given a life sentence. So Stephen and William became really good friends, or brothers as they referred to each other, while they were cellmates at HMP Swaleside. What could possibly go wrong? William would be released in October 2010 on a life licence after serving around 14 years. Being on life licence meant that his release is conditional. He has to follow a strict set of rules and conditions. He has to regularly see a probation worker and he must not reoffend. He can be recalled to prison at any time for any little thing. Stephen was also released on a life licence in December 2012. He had also served around 14 years. After his release, Stephen moved in with his new girlfriend, a woman named Rachel Edmondson. Rachel and Stephen had actually known each other many years ago. They had briefly dated when they were both teenagers in 1994. However, the relationship sort of fizzled out and they lost touch. Rachel was reintroduced to Stephen by a mutual friend when he was still incarcerated. She had no idea why he was in prison, but just that he was. One day the couple were both on the phone. Stephen is still in prison at this point, and he just lays all his cards on the table and tells Rachel that he is incarcerated because he killed someone, because he had committed a murder. But he didn't tell Rachel the whole truth. He told Rachel that he had killed John in self-defense because John had come at him with a knife. I mean, this didn't explain what Stephen was doing in John's bungalow at stupid o'clock in the morning on Christmas Day, but she believed him. She was manipulated by him. Manipulation was something that Stephen was very good at, and he would continue to do so over the course of their relationship. Stephen claimed that he was a rehabilitated man to Rachel. He said that he wanted to completely turn his life around. He wanted to start fresh. He wanted to use the skills that he had learned in prison to set up his own handyman business, which he did actually end up doing. I think when he was initially released, he did sort of stick to his word. He would attend the probationary meetings. He did set up that handyman business, and that's what he started to do as work. And he expressed to Rachel that he wanted to start a family. When later talking about Stephen, Rachel said that Stephen had said to her that he believed he had missed the best years of his life being in prison, and he didn't want the chance to become a dad to pass him by, and that he really wanted to start a family. The couple would go on to have a daughter, Stephen's wish of being a dad becoming true. However, their relationship didn't last. Rachel broke up with Stephen in May 2017 after a 5-year relationship when she discovered that Stephen had been cheating on her. I am just going to quickly rewind the timeline a little bit here. So Stephen and William got back in touch through social media sometime in 2016. Stephen had reached out to William, offering William to work alongside him for his maintenance business. So Stephen was a joiner. He would do joinery and whatever joiners do, and William was a painter and decorator. So when Stephen offered William this work, William gladly accepted, and from here spent most of his time living up north in a village called Shiny Row, which is very close to Sunderland. He did also sometimes go and live in Blackpool. He kind of floated between them, but most of the time he was living in Shiny Row. Along with Stephen's business, the men were essentially like ringleaders of a really big crime ring where they would obtain deadly weapons such as firearms, they would grow and sell their own cannabis and much more. They would take pictures like this and videos like the ones I'm about to show you, where they would show off their deadly weapons and their cannabis farms, and you'll see when you watch the videos that they think that what they're doing's great. They think it's hilarious and sort of showing off as well, really.
This is what you want, buddy. One of these fuckers. One of these. Look at that, baby. You see. Ooh, come on. That's what you want.
What? Hello, Stewie, baby. What you want to see, my friends? You want to buy some Chinese Thai stick?
Lovely cheese! Real cheese!
Stephen, after his release and breakup from Rachel, would be reported to the police 26 times, and I'm going to take you through some of the reasons why. On the 2nd of July 2017, a woman rang the police and reported that Stephen had threatened her. He had threatened her, saying he was going to smash her jaw in and that him and his cousin were going to take turns raping her. Imagine how terrifying that must be. This is a convicted killer, someone who you know is capable of evil, and he's threatening to cause you harm and then to rape you as well. I can't imagine how terrifying that must have been for that poor girl. While reporting this, she actually expressed over the phone that she was fearful and very worried about making this report in case it caused a retaliation from Stephen. So for that exact reason, she didn't end up taking the report any further, which is heartbreaking really, because you should be able to have faith that the police are going to protect you from dangerous people such as these. Another incident was logged when Stephen was caught just casually walking about with a can full of petrol or diesel. This is a man who is notorious for using arson to cover up his crimes. There was another incident where he had threatened one of his neighbours during an argument. He told them that he was going to burn the house down, a threat that should absolutely be taken seriously from someone who has already tried to do this twice. And another report of him threatening to assault a teenager. That is just a handful of around 26 reports. From just those few points there, you can see that he is not rehabilitated. He is still very much someone who is aggressive, who is violent, who could harm someone. He is a danger to society, and he is someone who at the very least needs help regulating their anger. Despite all of these reports and all of these incidences being logged by police, not one was reported to his probation worker like they were supposed to. His probation worker had no idea that he was still displaying these violent and aggressive tendencies. They had no idea that he was making threats to assault people, he was threatening to rape people, he was threatening to burn houses down. They had no idea he was doing that, and I can guarantee that if they did, he would have been recalled back to prison. The probationary services, though, they weren't doing their part either. Rachel would later recall that shortly after Stephen was released from prison, he had a couple of meetings with his probation worker, and then they just stopped and there was no sort of follow-up after that, and she couldn't recall a single time when they had just done a spot check on him. They were supposed to be closely monitoring Stephen, however that wasn't happening, because if it was, they would have intervened when they saw he was knocking about with another convicted killer, or they would have known that he was making these threats, or they would have known that he was buying and selling drugs and buying and selling weapons. They just weren't doing what they were supposed to. Stephen was left to do what he wanted and left with his own devices. So these are the men that Quyen is involved with, and again, she's completely oblivious. She has no idea about their criminal history. I don't know if she ever actually met William. Most of the communication was between Quyen and Stephen. It was his maintenance business after all. It wasn't actually unusual for Quyen and Stephen to be alone together. They would go and look at different properties, walk around them, look, see what work they need doing, you know, like that sort of stuff. They would go and view different properties together, and that's how they first met. Stephen had showed Quyen around a property in Sunderland in April 2017. So based off that, I don't think she was afraid or she had any problems or worries about being alone with Stephen. I don't think he gave her any reason to fear him at all, but again, she had no idea about his past or what he was currently involved in at that time. On the 14th of August 2017, shortly after 6:15 p.m, Quyen finishes work. She gets into her black Audi A4 and makes the drive over to Stephen's house at 2 St Oswald's Terrace in Shiny Row. It takes her just over an hour to get there, and once she arrives, she stands at the back gate. She texts Stephen to let him know that she's there, and then she waits. Quyen is under the ruse that she is here to either view this property or that this was a meeting spot, that her and Stephen were meeting here and then they were going to go and view another property. I don't think that she knew that this was Stephen's house. However, that wasn't why she was there. Stephen had arranged this false viewing with Quyen in order to lure her to his house so that he could act out on sadistic sexual fantasies that he had, to rob her and then to kill her. He and William had planned the whole thing. So as Quyen was leaving work and making her way over to the house, William had texted Stephen to confirm their plan. He had texted saying, quote, "Are we raping the blank?" He uses an awful slur that I'm not going to repeat. So this proves that it was premeditated. It wasn't something that just happened. So Quyen arrives at the house at around 7:30 p.m. She stands at the back gate waiting for about 2 minutes before Stephen emerges from the house. When he does, he sort of turns back and shoos something out of the way. He tells Quyen that he's talking to a dog, when in fact he's talking to William. He's shooing William out of the way, signalling him to keep out of the way and keep out of sight. Quyen walks with Stephen through the yard and into the house, and this is the last footage of Quyen alive. Immediately upon entering the house, Stephen and William pounced on Quyen, totally catching her off guard. They dragged her through the house and started to beat her, screaming at her, demanding that she give over her bank card and her PIN number. Quyen was a very petite woman. She was only about 5 foot in height and about 7 stone in weight, so she is no match for these two fully grown men who are towering over her. So in hopes that it'll stop the attack, she gives them what they want. She gives over her bank card and her PIN number, but they don't stop the attack. They continue. Over the next 4 hours, Quyen would be subjected to disturbing, degrading torture. She would be beaten and throttled while having a ligature tied around her neck. She would be raped by Stephen, and together the men used a toy lightsaber as part of sexually assaulting Quyen. A pistol or gun would also be used in the attack somehow. When it was later found, it had traces of her DNA on it, so likely she was held at gunpoint, or she was struck with it, or it was used as a part of the sexual assault. Quyen would be injected with whiskey before she was asphyxiated, either by having a pillow placed over her face or a plastic bag over her head. After enduring all of this, Quyen was passed out. She had no energy left. She was incapacitated on the floor, but she was alive. Halfway through the assault at around 9:45 p.m, Stephen had left the house and went to his local co-op. He went inside and used the cash machine to withdraw some money from Quyen's account before going to the counter, buying something and then heading back home to continue the assault. I think it was after he returned home that Quyen was then incapacitated. I think it makes sense to think that he wanted to check that she had given him the right details for our bank before he essentially knocked her out and would go on to kill her. So during this time that she was alone with William, we have no idea what happened. We also know that he did nothing to try and help or save her or bring any attention to her at all. He didn't call police, he wasn't under duress, nothing like that. During this time, he'd done nothing to help Quyen. After knocking Quyen out as she lay incapacitated on the floor, William and Stephen decided to just whip up a quick curry, and they sat and they had the tea and they ate it as if nothing was a bother. They had not a care in the world, and it didn't seem to affect them that this woman that was lay passed out on the floor in front of them was dying. Shortly before midnight, Quyen's body would be wrapped up in a white dust sheet. Stephen carried Quyen over his shoulder out to her Audi and lay her across the back seats. He and William went back into the house to collect something before returning to the Audi and driving off. Stephen drove the car from his house to a nearby area in Philadelphia. This screenshot will show you just how close the two locations are. He didn't drive very far at all. He drove the car down a desolate, secluded road before stepping out, dousing Quyen in petrol, dousing the car in petrol, and setting them both alight, burning Quyen alive. She was still alive at this point. A pathologist would later confirm that she had taken at least one breath while she was burning alive, which is absolutely horrific. I can't imagine the terror that Quyen must have felt in the final hours of her life, being lured, beaten, tortured, raped, sexually assaulted, and then burned alive. It's horrific and unthinkable to imagine that another human being is capable of doing this to somebody else. After leaving Quyen to burn alive, Stephen and William quite casually just walked back home. They jumped into Stephen's car and went to a nearby hole in the wall to extract more money from Quyen's bank account. Across both of the transactions, I believe they stole around about $1,000 from our account. While in the car, William for some reason decides that this is the perfect time to just take a selfie. You can see the picture here. William is smiling. He looks happy. He looks cheerful. He does not look distressed or under duress at all. And Stephen is just simply looking out of the window. This picture shows William and Stephen, two men who have just committed their second murder. At around 10 to 1 in the morning, the fire brigade received a report about a burning car. They promptly arrived at the scene and began to extinguish the fire. It was then just before 1 AM on the 15th of August 2017 that the body of 28-year-old Quyen Ngoc Nguyen was found. She had been engulfed by the flames and she was partially cremated. It was said that large parts of her skin just weren't there. They had been consumed by the fire and she had sort of fused into her back seats. Within the car, firemen had found Quyen's passport. Somehow that hadn't been obliterated by the fire, so they had a rough idea of who this person could be. However, it was dental records that positively ID'd Quyen. Because of the damage that the fire had done to her body, the pathologist could not confirm what exactly her cause of death was. However, he did say, quote, "Likely the cause of death was consistent with the effects of fire." Meanwhile, back in Killingworth, Quyen, who again is Quyen's sister, is frantic that her sister hasn't came home. This is extremely out of character for Quyen. She lives a very simple life where every day is mostly the same. Get up, sort the kids, go to work, come home, cook, clean, and then go to bed, ready to do it all the next day. So going off the map and going radio silent like this is just so odd. It's so out of character and it's really worrying Quyen. Quyen had contacted friends and acquaintances of Quyen to see if any of them had seen her, if she was with any of them, if any of them know where she was, but with each phone call and each text message, she was getting the same answer back. No one knew where Quyen was. By midday on the 15th of August, Quyen had had enough. She could not sit and wait any longer to see if Quyen was just going to show up, so she contacted the police and reported her sister missing. But Quyen couldn't just stop at that. She couldn't sit at home and wait and see if Quyen was going to just show up, so her and her husband had piled into the family car and they were just driving all around the roads, driving all around their local area to see if they could spot Quyen anywhere. However, little did they know Quyen had already been found. Police were quite quickly able to determine who they believed was responsible for Quyen's murder. William and Stephen had basically left a trail for police that led directly to them. They had been openly using her bank card in very public spaces, like that co-op shop which had CCTV of Stephen using her card. The CCTV showed Quyen going into Stephen's house but not coming back out, and the CCTV, it showed Stephen carrying Quyen in that sheet over his shoulder into the car, then the car being driven to where it was dumped and then set alight. So really all of this led directly to William and Stephen. It took police not even 12 hours to find Stephen Unwin and William McFall and get them into custody, and as you can imagine, as soon as they were in custody they completely denied involvement and instead started to blame each other. Stephen told the police that he and Quyen were in a romantic relationship and that's why she had gone to his house. Just a quick side note, Quyen has profusely denied that there was any sort of relationship between Quyen and this man apart from like a working one. Like Quyen would employ him to do work on the houses that she rented out, but there was no sort of romantic relationship there, and there was no evidence to suggest that there was as well. If they were in a romantic relationship, you'd think they'd have like a couple of flirty texts or anything like that, but there was nothing at all to indicate that they were in a romantic relationship. He continued on saying that he had gone to the co-op to buy some cigarettes. That's what he was buying on the CCTV that I showed you earlier on, and that when he returned back home he walked in and saw that William had his hands around Quyen's neck and she was laid on the floor lifeless. William had a much less elaborate story. He just said that he had watched Stephen smother Quyen with a pillow and then go out to buy cigarettes, and that was that. He had watched Stephen murder Quyen, but he wasn't involved in it at all. When he was arrested, Stephen was wearing a blue pair of swimming shorts which had some low-level DNA on there belonging to Quyen. Low-level DNA is also known as touch DNA, so it's likely that she had brushed the shorts or the shorts had somehow touched her and some of her skin cells had transferred onto them, and that is the low-level DNA that was found. Also, and I'm presuming it's on his boxers because all the reports that I read refer to them as pants, but if he's arrested wearing blue swimming shorts, I'm gathering that pants meant underwear. So on his boxers, on his pants, they found little splashes of blood, and that blood belonged to Quyen. Cargo shorts that William was wearing when he was arrested was found to have low-level DNA belonging to Quyen on the inside of the shorts, kind of front centre, which would be the crotch area of the shorts. She had touch DNA in there as well. After their questioning, both men would be charged with Quyen's murder. Their trial was held at Newcastle Crown Court, where both men entered not guilty pleas. The jury were told about both of the men's previous crimes, both of their old murder convictions, and the similarities that both of their murders had with Quyen's murder. For example, she was a more vulnerable person who couldn't defend herself against these two men, just like how the two pensioners were that William and Stephen had murdered. How monetary gain was partially motive for the murder, just like how it had been for Martha's murder. Again, William believed she had loads of money stashed under her bed, and how at the end she was burned alive in hopes to incinerate any evidence, which is something that Stephen had historically done. The jury was shown evidence from the men's phones showing that they were still engaging in criminal activity, so this included possessing guns and firearms and proof that they were selling cannabis. This was proved in some text messages where they had discussed pricing with someone. The evidence on this phone also shown that they had planned to cause harm to Quyen. This was proven in the text message that I told you about earlier when William wanted to confirm with Stephen that they were going to rape Quyen. After a 4-week trial and 4 hours of deliberation, Stephen Unwin and William McFall were both found guilty of the murder of Quyen Ngoc Nguyen. The judge commented to both men saying, quote, "Stephen Unwin, you are a calculating, manipulative and ruthless killer. William John McFall, you are an extremely violent man capable of monstrous behaviour." William didn't like this and he actually shouted back at the judge saying like, "Well, that's your opinion." Throughout the trial, William did have several little outbursts like this. He shouted, calling the evidence bullshit, and at the end, when he got the guilty verdict, he shouted saying that he didn't have a fair trial and that he was going to take this all the way to the highest courts because his trial wasn't fair, and he also said that the jury were brainwashed. Stephen was also found guilty of raping Quyen. DNA that belonged to him was found inside of Quyen, so I am assuming that that was sperm DNA. On the 25th of April 2018, both men were sentenced and both of them received whole life orders, meaning that they will never be released from prison, they will die behind bars, and they will never get another chance at freedom. The last that I read about Stephen is that he is serving in HMP Frankland, which is a Category A prison in Durham and is nicknamed the Monster Mansion. From prison, he has wrote a couple of letters proclaiming his innocence. I'm going to pop one on the screen now, you can have a little read of it, and I couldn't find where William is serving. Quyen's death was heartbreaking for her family. Quyen has done a couple of interviews where she talks about the impact Quyen's death has had on the family. Her parents had to find out what happened to Quyen through the news because Quyen could not bring herself to tell her parents that Quyen had not only been viciously murdered but that she had been burned alive. She just couldn't bring herself to do it. In one interview, Quyen spoke about how Quyen's son had asked his auntie if he could take her to heaven so that he could see his mum. And that is today's case. A young woman who was a beloved mother, a beloved family member, a business owner, someone who came to the UK for a better and safer life, murdered by two evil men for no other reason than sexual fantasies and greed. Many services failed Quyen by not doing their jobs properly. If the police and the probation services worked together properly and done what they were supposed to, they would have took these dangerous men off the street much earlier, keeping the community safe and saving Quyen's life, not giving them the opportunity to go on to murder her. It is just a heartbreaking case that if they had done their jobs properly, they would have saved Quyen's life. Thank you all so much for sitting and listening with me today. If you would like to watch another true crime case covered by me, I have plenty on my channel that are there ready for you to all go and watch right now. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe and click the little bell button so that you'll be notified every time I upload a brand new true crime case. I also cover true crime over on my TikTok in much shorter form. If you're interested in watching that, I'll link it down below. I have also linked a Google Docs form down there. If you have any case recommendations that you would like me to cover on my YouTube channel, go ahead and fill out that form and I will take all of your recommendations into consideration. So yeah, I'm gonna leave today's video at that one. Thank you all so much again for sitting and listening and watching with me. I really appreciate your support and I will see you all on my next one.